Hey guys, I know some of you said that the video was glitching or you had a hard time watching it earlier from science. So I'm going to go ahead and play the video and then I'll talk a little bit about the main part of the activity that you should be doing at the end of watching this video.
Hi, I'm Martel. How do you measure things? In this activity, your students will measure, collect, analyze, and record properties of various common objects. They'll also find out whether an object sinks or floats, and learn if it's magnetic. Here's what each group will need: a magnet, a balance, a metric ruler, a beaker of water, various objects to test: paper clips, plastic beads, aluminum foil, an aluminum can, wooden blocks, etc., and a science journal. Each student will need a student investigation sheet. Before you get started, remind your students to be careful using glass objects such as beakers and to follow all safety guidelines. Okay, divide students into small groups and hand out the activity materials. First, ask the group to plan how they'll investigate the properties of the materials. Have them create a list of tools in their science journals they'll use to investigate. Distribute the student investigation sheet. Begin by asking students to describe the objects using as many properties as possible. Allow the groups to come up with their own list of properties, but make sure that they use properties they can observe, such as color, luster, texture, and shape. Students shouldn't assume properties. For example, some may have heard of electric conductivity and may assume that the paperclip and aluminum can conduct electricity. However, this is not a property they'll be able to observe. Next, ask students to measure or test as many properties as they can using the available tools. You may wish to assign each student one object so that he or she has an opportunity to perform each type of measurement. Each student should make a table to record the data for each type of object. They should check in on each group. Make sure that students are using the tools correctly and that they know which properties they're measuring. They should be able to explain that they use the balance to measure mass, the ruler to measure length, be sure to use metric units, and the magnet to test for magnetic attraction. They should also explain that the beaker of water could be used to see if an object sinks or floats. Encourage students to carefully check their measurements. For instance, they expect the paperclip to have more mass than the wooden block based on your observations. Students may need to use more than one object to equal 1 gram when measuring mass. For example, they may need 3 beads to equal 1 gram. Challenge students to think about how changing one property might affect another property. Ask your students, will changing the shape of the foil change the mass? What about if you cut the foil in half and measure the mass of 1/2? Finally, have students test the properties by seeing if the object sinks or floats. Have them place each object in a beaker of water. They should make qualitative observations about how high the object floats or how quickly it sinks. Now ask your students, does changing the size of an object change its physical properties? Have them investigate this question by choosing a sample of matter. For example, aluminum foil, clay, or water, and breaking, tearing, or pouring it so that they are only working with only 1/2. Then they should observe its properties again. Students should notice that its mass and volume decrease and its size changes, but that other physical properties, such as color or texture, remain the same. On chart paper, ask students to list the properties that change when the size of an object changes, and the properties that do not change. Explain that the properties that do not change are characteristic properties. These can be used to identify whether 2 substances are the same anywhere in the world. Finish by having students analyze their information and organize objects based on their properties. They should construct a graphic organizer using the Discovery Education Graphing Tool or other graphing programs. Have them make as many different groups as possible and record the objects in each group. For example, they could organize objects by mass, size, luster, and attraction to magnets. And finally, have everyone come together to compare results. Have each group share one of their object classifications with the class. Discuss how being able to classify the objects might be useful. For example, plastic doesn't have much mass or size. This might help a designer determine that plastic should be used in backpack construction because it would make the backpack less heavy.
All right, guys, so hopefully that was helpful to you. Just kind of looking through the questions real quick that you're going to be answering. There's a couple different groups. One is making a prediction. So just predicting based on what you already know, come up with some answers to these questions. Make sure you hit submit. Ignore the list of materials, ignore the what you will do, because you are just gonna think of 3 items on your own. It could be like a tin can or an aluminum can, like a soda can. It could be a wooden block and maybe a paper clip. And then you're gonna need to come up with some properties of those items. Remember, properties could be color, it could be mass, and you might not be able to say how much each one weighs, but you could say if it's heavy or light. It could be size. Everyone should have a ruler. Those were in your planners. If you can't find one, you could talk about if they're big or small. It could be texture. Is it rough? Is it smooth? Is it hard? Is it soft? It could be luster, like is it shiny or is it dull? It could be whether or not it's magnetic. But you need to list some different properties for those 3 items that you choose. And I know it says it's picture, but you don't need to put a picture of the item. Make sure you submit and then keep going. And at the bottom, there's think about the activity, where you can talk about what tools you used, whether you used a ruler or whether you actually put it in water to see if it would float or not. And then some other questions for you to consider and answer there, and then hit submit when you're done with that. All right, guys, hopefully that's helpful. Just for those of you, again, who I was glitching out for, you said, during our science lesson this morning. Talk to you guys later.